over 100 books in 2023, and today I'm going to tell you about my top 15. Typically, I think I do a top 10, but this year I needed 15. I just like for these books and this video to really represent my year of reading for me to look back on, for you to take away my top recommendations, or just to recap the year that we've had together here on YouTube. And I needed 15 books to represent that. I couldn't narrow it down to 10. I've also decided that I'm going to go in different categories of my reading a little bit, not genre, more vibes. You'll see when we get started. These aren't going in order of like 15 up to the #1 book that I did this year. They're instead just in groupings of my vibes that I had this year of reading. The first theme that I have to review is ridiculous books that I loved this year. There was something about just an absolutely insane book that I so gravitated towards this year. I think part of it is coming out of the heaviness that we've had in the pandemic and just all the heaviness of the past couple of years. When I'm reading a heavier book, like a mystery or a thriller or a horror book, something about it being a silly, goofy time really works for me. These books are campier, they are what I call ridiculous, and they are so much fun for me. They are not for everyone. I feel like you love them or you hate them, but these are 3 ridiculous books that I loved. First up is perhaps the most ridiculous of the pile, and that is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I think this book really works super well for people who are in the booktube environment as well, because this is a book about this woman who reads a book and she hates it and she writes a 1-star review, and then the author gets so mad at her, and now she has someone coming after her, and it might be the author, it might be someone else, I don't know, but it is just so silly. It's such a silly idea that you could write a 1-star review of a book and then somehow you end up being thrown into this horrorscape environment that involves a sword. That's all I'll say about it. It is just, it's so silly, and it's fun, and it's fast-paced, and it's twisty, and it's turny. It has one of the most ridiculous characters I may have ever read about, and it'll just really keep you on the edge of your seat. This is the kind of book I love that I can just fly through and be totally entertained by and be totally consumed, and it's definitely one of my standout thrillers of the year. Next up is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is a story about these women who get this opportunity to go to this exclusive writing retreat with this famous author. Only a couple of women are chosen to go do this, but then once they arrive, they realize the stakes are much higher than they thought they might have been. The direction this book goes totally took me by surprise. I read this very, very early on before many people were picking it up, so I hadn't heard anyone talk about it. I didn't even know to go into it expecting it to be ridiculous, and it was just such a good time. It absolutely tailspins into the strangest direction. It's dark, there's demons maybe. It's very absurd, and it's just so over the top and so fun. And next up is a story that kind of toes the line of the thriller and the horror genre, and that is The Venue by TJ Payne. This is a story about a woman who gets invited to a wedding of an estranged friend of hers, and then things get messy at the wedding. This is another one that's just fun and fast-paced and campy and absurd. It's a sort of eat the rich type of story as well, which I always find to be a good time. And I know I did not give you very much to go off of for these 3 books. I didn't go super in-depth into them, and that's because some of the best parts of these books is the absolute ride that you go on reading them, and so I don't want to give you too much information if you haven't gotten a chance to read them yet. Go in knowing just a little bit about it and just buckle up for a really fun ride. The next category is just 2 books that I just call fun. I just thought they were a fun time. One's a thriller, one's more of a family drama, and I really loved both of them. First, we'll start with a thriller, and that is The Drowning Woman by Robin Harding. This is a cat and mouse style thriller that follows these 2 women whose paths intersect, and they just start to make each other's lives messy. One day, this wealthier woman named Lee, who seems to have it all, is out by the beach, and she sees a woman named Hazel who is drowning, and she helps rescue her. After this, the 2 become sort of friends, and then Hazel tells Lee that she wants to disappear from her life, and Lee agrees to help her do that. And what follows after that is so twisty and so fun, and I really love the way that this book reveals itself and the way that it's structured as you're finding out more of what's really going on in this story. It's one of my favorite structures and styles of a thriller, where you're following different characters who have different things going on, and you get to see both of their perspectives and like the secrets that they may be hiding and the motives that may be coming into different things going on between them, and creating a really really weird dynamic. I've read several books from Robin Harding before, but this is definitely the most impressive to me so far, and I'm so excited to see what she does next. And the other book in this category is Sign Here by Claudia Lux. This is more of a family drama, sort of has some thriller elements to it, and it's kind of a dark comedy. It's a lot of things. It's also a debut book, and I found it to be wildly impressive for a debut. It's also a kind of absurd book because in it you're following a character who works in hell. He literally works in hell. His name is Peyote, and his job is to get people to sign their souls over to then come to hell once they die. And he has collected a good amount of souls, especially from this rich family on Earth named the Harrison family. And he is on the cusp of getting a promotion. He just has to get one more member of the Harrison family to sell their soul over to him. And in the story, you're following his journey trying to do that along with his friend and coworker Calamity. And then you're also following the Harrison family on Earth and uncovering all of their family dramas and secrets and things that they have going on between them as well. I just had so much fun with this. I thought the characters were written so well. The idea was so fresh and unique. I loved the dark comedy feel to it as well, and it's one that I highly recommend. Next up are two cozier books. The first one is a romance, and that is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I'm actually loaning this book out to a friend right now because I love it so much and I want to share it with other people. So I don't have the physical copy with me at the moment, but it is absolutely one of my favorite romances that I've ever read, and I don't read many romance, but this one I really enjoyed, and I will definitely be picking up more from the author, including the sequel, which I do own, but I just haven't gotten to quite yet, but I do plan to read very soon. This is just a really realistic, wholesome romance novel that follows these two characters, Alexis and Daniel, who come from two very different worlds. Alexis is about a decade older than Daniel, and she comes from this successful family of surgeons, and she is very much following in her family's footsteps. She works at the hospital that her family is associated with, and she just has a lot of expectations set for her and this really intense city life being a surgeon. But then she ends up meeting Daniel on a chance encounter when she ends up getting stuck in a ditch. And Daniel is from this small town. He runs a B&B, and they just live wildly different lives. But when their paths intersect, they end up being drawn to each other, and throughout the story, they become a part of each other's world. And it's just such a beautiful story. There's so many realistic challenges for both of the characters that prevent them from easily coming together, and I just really liked watching their love story. Particularly Daniel is one of my favorite characters I've ever read in a romance, and I'm just very excited to continue in the series. Next up is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. This is a cozy murder mystery that I had so much fun with. In this story, you're following an older woman named Vera Wong who runs a tea shop, and one day a dead body is found in her tea shop, and before the police can get there, she decides to do a little investigating herself, and she finds a flash drive in the guy's hand that she decides to secretly take, and then she wants to try to solve the mystery. So she is investigating this throughout the story. She is pulling together suspects that she thinks may be involved in the murder of this man, and it is just such a fun little cozy murder mystery. These characters are so witty and silly to follow, and it's just really fun watching Vera develop throughout the story and first be seen as this kind of cold, harsh older woman, but watching other characters warm up to her throughout the story, even though they are her suspects. You have some found family elements, you have some unlikely pairings between the characters, and it was a really good time. The final 8 books that I have to talk about, I'm lumping into a category that I just call literary masterpieces. I just think these books were beautifully crafted, beautifully put together, and I don't think it's so much a personal thing for me that I enjoyed these. I think these are books that can be and should be enjoyed by many people. There's a mix of mystery, thriller, literary suspense, horror in here, so it's just a big stack of books that I really think you should read. Let's start off with Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll. This is a literary suspense type of story that is a fiction book that is mostly inspired by true events based on the lives of the victims of Ted Bundy. Throughout the story, you're mainly following 3 women, Pamela, Tina, and Ruth, who have all been affected in some way by this killer. Pamela is the president of a sorority club, and one night her house gets attacked by a man who comes in and injures some women and ends up killing some women, and Pamela is left to put the pieces together of all of the women in her house, following her right after those events and as she meets a woman named Tina, who has also been impacted by who she thinks is the same killer on a different side of the country. She had a friend named Ruth who was murdered, and she believes that the same guy is responsible for this attack on the sorority house, and so she ends up starting to communicate with Pamela and trying to work together to help put the man responsible behind bars. You're also following Ruth's story before her death, seeing what led to her death. And it is just such a beautifully crafted story that really honors the victims and survivors of these brutal acts by this brutal person. I did read this book in the Goodreads Choice Awards mystery thriller video that I put together because this was nominated for that category and it did make it into the top 10. So I did talk a lot about it in that video if you want to watch it, but I also just really appreciate the author's perspective on this book, really telling a story about the bright young women whose real lives were impacted versus focusing on glorifying a murderer, which is often done in different true crime documentaries and stories and fictionalized accounts that happen. So I think it was done really well. It was a really immersive story and it was very emotional and impactful. Next up is a horror novel called Monstrillo by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This has just got to be one of my favorite books I've read, like ever. It's so good. I cannot express enough how good this book is. It's one of the few books that I've ever wanted to be longer so that I could spend more time with these characters. I'm always so critical of books' lengths, but I'm like, oh, I could have just used more from this. I just loved it so much. It's a story where you're following this family and it is told in 4 parts from 4 different perspectives. In the beginning of the story, you're following this couple who loses their son. They watch as he ends up dying, and then the mother decides in a moment of grief to take a piece of the boy's lung, and then she ends up keeping the lung and feeding the lung, and that ends up growing into this creature called Monstrillo. And the story follows them throughout the years. You follow these 4 different characters throughout their time grieving the loss of their son and also taking in this new monster creature that is following them along in their journey of grief. And it is just so perfect. And there's moments of humor and there's moments of absolute devastation, and it's just such a real portrait of grief and such an interesting choice that the author makes to tell the story in this way, to follow these different characters. It ends perfectly. It's literally the perfect book. Next up is The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell. This book I think is just a really solid mystery that's just written really well. It unfolds well. You get really absorbed in the characters because they feel so real, and it's just really well done. The concept of it isn't anything absolutely crazy or transformational for the genre. I just think it is executed on very, very well. In this story, there were these 2 teenagers who went missing and the case is run cold, and now sometime later this new woman who's a writer is moving into this house with her husband, and then she finds a sign out in her back garden that says "dig here." She digs it up and then she finds some things, and then she starts to uncover this cold case and go about trying to solve it herself. You get the story told from different perspectives. You follow the writer's perspective and then you follow other characters involved in the mystery as well. And it's just so good. It's so compelling. It really snuck up on me. I didn't expect it to be this good because it just sounded like, you know, your average kind of mystery, but it really pulled me in and I really enjoyed it. Next up is Ling Hun by Ai Zhang, and I will tell you very little about this book because it is a very little horror novella and it is best consumed without knowing much about what you're getting yourself into. All that I will let you know is it is a gothic story about grief. That's really all you need to know. You're following this girl who's moving into this new town with her family, and she is uncovering what's going on in the town as she is there. And it's dark and it's heavy and it's lyrical and it's like nightmarish in quality. It's so unique and fun, and I was just really surprised by it, and I think way more people need to be reading it. Next up is Lakewood by Megan Giddings. This is a story about this woman named Alina whose grandmother dies, and after her grandmother dies, she takes it upon herself to support her family because her mother can't work. And so Lena drops out of college and she ends up taking this job offer to be involved in this medical research that sounds a little too good to be true because it's coming with a lot of money, but it just seems like potentially a weird situation, and it is indeed a weird situation. And throughout the story, you are following Lena as she uncovers the horrors of what's going on in this medical research. You follow along right with her through this nightmarish experience, and you become just as disoriented as she is. So I think not only is juicy story, really well told and hitting on really important messages about racial discrimination in the medical field, but also it just makes some really smart choices in structure and form with taking you on this disorienting journey with her. It really just amplifies the atmosphere of the story, and I really enjoyed it. Next up is Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This is a longer book, but it is well worth the read. In this story, you are following a man and his son in the aftermath of the loss of the man's wife and the child's mother. After she dies, they end up going on this journey on the run away from them because the woman was a part of this secret society family called the Order, who is in search of eternal life. Essentially, they might kind of be like vampires in a way, but that's for you to figure out as you go through the story. It's a long book that is long spanning through different countries and many years of these family members' lives in the aftermath of this event, and it is just so smart. It is such a smart book, and the characters feel so real, and you really just get pulled into this world, and it is just a literary masterpiece. Next up is maybe the only book in this portion that I wouldn't broadly recommend to a lot of people because it's a little bit more niche and I think who will enjoy it, and that is Looking Glass Sound by Katrina Ward. I say that because Katrina Ward is marketed among horror authors and is kind of in that commercial author bucket, but I don't think this is a book that will appeal to mass audiences. It's more of a really slow burn psychological story about friendship and also about authorship and telling your own story. So it's not a book that I feel like the masses would enjoy, but if that sounds interesting to you, I do strongly recommend it because I had a great time with it and I loved just exploring the depths of this story. It's a story where you're following this guy, Wilder, who ends up going on this vacation when he's a teenager that basically alters the course of his life, and you're following him in the years after this first summer he spends at this vacation place. This is another one that I think is just such a smart story, and it's so fun to dissect the layers as you get into the later half of the book and really piece together what this book is doing and what this author is saying about authorship and about telling your own stories. It is a little bit of a fever dream as well, which I always love those types of books, but mostly it feels really rooted and grounded in reality for a lot of the book, and is just about betrayal and friendships and obsession, and it's just a good time. And lastly is The Center by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. In this story, you're following a woman named Anissa who ends up hearing about this exclusive experience where you can go to this place called The Center to learn a full new language and become completely fluent in it in a very short period of time. And she has dreams of becoming an acclaimed translator, so she decides to take on this experience and go to the center to learn a new language. Once she arrives and spends more time at the center and with her mentor there, and then actually ends up going back again to learn another language, she starts to uncover some of the dark secrets of how this is possible and what's really going on at the center. Again, a really smart book, a literary masterpiece. It is written with such a sharp voice, and it is so well constructed, and it explores so many different themes of colonialism and language, and it's just so clever, and it's surprising the direction it goes, and what's really going on at the center is very interesting to uncover, and I did not fully see it coming. So that's it for my top 15 books of 2023. Like I said at the beginning, these are just what I think of when I think of my year of my 2023 reading. These are my standout books. This just encapsulates what I loved and what I was reading this year, and I'm so glad that I found these books. I know I didn't spend a ton of time going super in depth into each of them, but that is because most, if not all of these, have been captured in my channel throughout the year in either reading vlogs or book recommendation videos or wrap-up videos. So if there's anything you want to really hear me talk more about, you could probably just search in YouTube for Ashley's Little Library and then the book's title, and probably that will get you to the video that you're looking to see where I feature that video if you want to hear my full thoughts and my full review, and sometimes even watch my full experience reading a book if I read it in a reading vlog. I'll also link some videos down below in the description that I know are really good quick resources to go. Like I know I did a dedicated video to Our Share of Night, for example, so I'll have that linked below down there and you can go check those out. Let me know down in the comments below if I convinced you to pick any of these books up, and also let me know what are your kind of standout books of 2023. What are the first couple of books you think of when you think of your reading experience this year, and let me know if you have any additional recommendations for me. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!